Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Force Strategy Gaming. How's everyone doing today? We're going to be looking at a Terran strategy today, and this is going to be the player we're focusing on here is MMA, and the opponent is Idra. Now, this was from the recent MLG that did take place, and what we're specifically looking at from MMA is opening up with a 2 racks, which is nowadays a pretty standard opener against any Zerg opponent, really. Can be pretty effective most of the time, but opening up with a 2 racks, keeping consistent marine pressure non-stop. After the 2 racks, if it happens to fail, dropping down an additional 2, keep churning out those Marines, and then getting an expansion up. And this constant early game Marine pressure is going to do a few things. One of the primary things that it would do is it actually forces that Zerg player to make Zerglings instead of drones. And what's going to happen is if they happen to fend off that initial push of the 2 racks, which a lot of times, especially in the higher leagues, they will be able to pretty much no problem. Once that happens, you're going to see a lot of Zerg players then go straight to droning up. Well, if you can then follow up with a second strong Marine push out of 4 barracks and then drop an expansion while that push is coming out, you can really set yourself up in a really good position. In this particular game, MMA actually ends up winning in that secondary push just because Idra had droned up pretty hard and wasn't able to defend himself against it. So let's slow it on down really quick and just take a quick look at the build order. Opening's very simple. 10 depot, 11 racks. You're cutting SCVs then, and at 11 again is a second barracks. Then you start turning out Marines at 14 supplies when your Orbital Command starts building. Now, here's a really important part of this basic initial early game push. You want 1 SCV at the very least. You will see some players bring 2 to 3 SCVs as well. The whole goal is to try to get up a bunker, use also the SCVs as a buffer, and your Marines to try to obviously take out the drones. Now what's going to happen is a lot of Zerg players, if they're used to this or comfortable with it, as Idra is, they will of course realize that if they can just stop you from getting up that bunker, they're going to be in a good spot. So you can see right now Idra waiting until he had his Zerglings in play, and then pulling down with those workers to actually kill off the SCV building the bunker. And that's going to be his primary focus. He will be going straight for those SCVs and to try to stop the completion of that bunker. Once that happens, with enough Zerglings and enough drones, he'll be able to mop up this early game push. Now, if this happens to you, if you happen to get this early push mopped up as easily as Idra was able to 10 with it here, don't really worry about it. What's going to happen then is, as example, we can see MMA did drop down this barracks here at the low ground. Lift it up if you see a counterattack coming, roll back into your main, and then you're dropping down an additional 2 barracks. And what's going to happen is once these are up, you just want to keep churning out those Marines. Now, something to keep in mind is that this initial push won't necessarily even do as bad as it happened to do here for MMA. Idra is just very good at responding to it. Try to make sure that you, of course, complete that wall off. Having those Zerglings in your base could be a huge, huge headache. But what happened in that initial push, let's just think about it really quick when we pause here. That initial push, it forced Idra to make a lot more Zerglings than he would really like to. Most Zerg players are going to start the game off with just 2, possibly even 4 Zerglings. That's what you see most of the time, and then droning up. So because of that, since Idra was forced to come out with all these Zerglings, he knows economically he's hurting a little bit. So what his response will then be is to come out with a lot of drones. You won't really see the Zerg player likely continuously come out with any more Zerglings after that point. They're likely just going to respond by droning up because they need their economy to work to basically get back to a stronger position. So what you will then do in response, and what we will see MMA do, let me pick it right back up here, is just keep churning out those Marines. Keep that Marine production non-stop. Once these 2 barracks complete, you of course will consistently be building Marines out of that, and just keep up that aggression. Don't just sit in your base with these Marines, especially if you apply early 2 racks pressure. A lot of Zerg players won't be able to, they won't have that metabolic boost early enough to deal with it. And even if they do have that metabolic boost, a strong enough force of Marines can contend with those Zerglings, no problem. As long as you make sure that your front is defended and you're not in a vulnerable position at the front of your base, and you have a wall off and some Marines be able to reinforce if he does go for just a counterattack, then you're going to be in a really strong spot. So we're going to see MMA move out right now. Again, with this continuous Marine aggression, just streaming out Marines. You can see that they're all, of course, rallied to the Marines. And, of course, you can rally to multiple Marines by just holding down shift on that rally point and clicking on additional Marines. And this continuous pressure is also going to be followed up with an expansion. So once you're pushing out with these Marines, you want to go ahead and drop an expansion. Now what's going to happen in this particular game is the Zerg player here, Idra, will just in fact call GG. He's going to actually just quit out of the game. And we have to think about the reasons why. One of the primary reasons why is because that initial 2 racks pressure forced him to make those initial Zerglings, which put him behind economically, which then forced him in turn to make sure that he didn't slip too far behind, drone up very, very hard. Because of that hard drone up, if that first initial 2 racks push does happen to fail, then a subsequent 4 racks push will be very strong. So let's take a look at the build order that ended up working into play here for MMA, and once more realize that build orders are always subject to change. The exact numbers are going to depend and vary depending on what's going on in the game. If you do push out with some aggression, how many units you've lost, everything like that. It's all about responding to your opponent. Everything, of course, in this game is situational. What ended up happening in this game, though, is we saw the open of the 10 depot and then the 11 racks get placed down for MMA, cutting SCV production at that point for that second 11 racks. Now, once that's building, you can keep up the SCV production. Once your first barracks does finish at what it's going to be 14 supply, since you had cut SCV production, at that point you will be coming out with the Orbital Command, because you, of course, want to grab those mules as quickly as possible. They help quite a bit at being able to fuel and fund this opening game push. Now, the initial push is just going to be a standard 2 racks pressure, move down with about maybe between 1 and 3 SCVs, try to get a depot up. If the Zerg player responds properly and pulls off enough drones and uses his Zerglings as well, he should be able to stop this initial Marine push that you move out with. And if that happens, it's quite fine. Pull back to your base, drop down an additional 2 racks. Now, this is a variant to what you kind of see in a normal 2 rack situation. In a normal 2 rack situation, you see the 2 racks opening, and if it fails, no big deal. The Terran player stays in their base, and they come up with that expansion. But instead of using those resources to come up with this expansion, as we saw, MMA instead dropped down 2 more barracks, kept up that Marine production, pushed out with a second attack, and then at that point came down with this expansion. So the expansion is delayed, but the early game aggression is increased, and that's actually what ended up forcing Idra to GG because of, again, once more, after that initial push, Idra droned up, and he did not have the forces to deal with a secondary push. And again, a secondary push after 2 racks moving into a 4 racks push, that is not very common. So incorporating this into your ladder play could definitely be a good tactic and can certainly show some good results if you do it to any sort of effectiveness, as we saw MMA do here. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Realize that after this point, let's just say Idra happened to fend this off and it didn't end up winning right here. You would then probably want to get a bunker up at your expansion, just use those Marines to defend there. And then once this is all going on, getting a refinery or 2 to start to make your transition, whatever it may be, moving into Hellions, moving into Marine Tank, getting some dropping, which is something we do see MMA do quite a bit. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. If you did, please do go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And as always, guys, keep watching and keep owning.